good evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where you are joining us from. And thank you for joining us this evening for our pre-health webinar. My name is Morgan Farrar. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of our admissions officers at WashU. I'm here just for some lovely introductions and conclusions. You are not here to hear me speak because I'm also joined by Carolyn Herman, who is going to be speaking to you all about pre-health opportunities and advising here at WashU, whether this is something you're still deciding upon or you are ready to get started on your pre-health journey. Carolyn will be doing a set of slides to just give you all an overview of the pre-health experience at WashU. I will be behind the scenes answering some questions, so you should see that there is a Q&A feature available to you bottom of your screen. Please feel free to utilize that as she is presenting. Otherwise, we will also have some time for Q&A at the end. That's a great opportunity to ask some of those overarching questions that might apply to a bunch of folks who are thinking the same thing, but I'll try to address as many as I can in the meantime. So feel free to start submitting those as soon as you are ready. Again, the reminder, this will be a recorded webinar, so you will have access to this via your WashU pathway after this concludes sometime tomorrow. So know if there's a question or information you feel like you missed, this will be available to you as a resource after today. All right, with that, I'm going to transition to Carolyn. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Morgan. I'm really delighted to be here, and thanks so much to families and students that are joining us today. I direct the pre-health advising program, and I've actually been doing that for over a dozen years. So I've been here quite a long time and watched a lot of Washington University students be, very successful along, their pre-health path. And I was thinking about, when I thought, what do I want to share with families before their student has even come to college, or with students as they're on their way into college. And I thought, I spend a lot of time in the first year or two, kind of like trying to correct some misconceptions that students sometimes have about what will help them be successful. So I thought we would start tonight with some myth busting. So one thing I hear a lot from younger students is that they're going to major in biology because they are pre-med. And so there seems to be a lot of a sense that like biology is the best major to do, or that's going to really be the right path, especially if you want to go to med school. And that is not true. It's not true anywhere, but it's really not true here. 38% of I went in and actually counted in a recent year where I had full application outcomes for medical school. 38% of our successful first-time applicants didn't major in biology. But 25%, a whole quarter of them, didn't even major in natural science at all. We have students who are doing anthropology. We have a huge medical anthropology focus in our anthropology program here. Students are more and more interested in economics, thinking about, how is the, how are we going to pay for healthcare for, our entire population? And if I understand something about economic systems in general, maybe I can make a policy contribution as well as the, kind of patient care that I want to deliver. We have a lot of really interesting interdisciplinary majors, and our philosophy, neuroscience, psychology is wildly popular, especially with pre-meds. But we have students who are majoring in psychological and brain sciences, who are majoring in languages, Spanish being probably at the top of that list. And because this is historic data, it's not reflected here yet, but I am sure that our public health and society major is also going to be, an attractive path for many of my students who are interested in the health profession. Another, thing I worry about, that I hear people worrying about is, oh, my grades aren't perfect. Or they, know somebody who went to another school where, they couldn't be a part of the pre-health program unless they met certain benchmarks of some kind. And we just don't do that here. We support every student's application. And there are plenty of my students that have lower grades on the front end as they're making an adjustment to college. It might mean that they need to develop new study skills. It might mean that they need to develop stronger self-management skills. You know, there's lots of growing that happens at the beginning of college. And so it doesn't matter if you don't, you know, have straight A's right out of the gate. You can build an upward trend and become a strong applicant. And I really mean this statement on this screen. If you are motivated and driven, you can become a physician or dentist or physical therapist or whatever your, you know, goal in the future is. It is not a question of if, it is really when. So obviously, if you have some softer grades early on, you might, you know, you might make sure you apply after your senior year so that they can see those stronger senior year grades. But there's, you know, so timing could change, your path might change, but your destination does not ever have to change. There is no academic mistake you can make that, you know, takes you out of the running. And I also want to point out that really more than half of our applicants who had a final science GPA of, you know, like in the B+ range is the average, were admitted the first time they applied. So we, you know, and even those students that weren't admitted the first time they applied, they can continue improving their applications. When they reapply, they will be admitted. So I think, you know, I want to be every Washington University student and their families to know that if this is what they want, they can get there from here. There also are a lot of, I hear this a little more from parents, but from students as well, that, you know, they're really eager for their students to go straight through, you know, apply summer after their junior year because the application process and interview process is a year long, and then they'll start medical school right after they graduate, or dental school or whatever it may be. And nationally, and this is for medical school, nationally, the number of students who've been out of school at least 1 year when they start medical school is 70%. 80% of the students we advise take a gap year. So we are actually a little higher than the national average, but not way out of range. It's just common everywhere now. But what is key is that all of our advising and application support resources are available to alumni, and they are all available virtually. So you do not have to stay in St. Louis. Some of my students do. They get a great job here, or they already have a great job here that is, you know, in clinical research, or they're doing something they really like, and they, you know, they want to just keep doing that while they apply. That's fine. But you can absolutely go back home and get a job, and everything that you need to support your application will still be available to you. Want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think makes being pre-health here really attractive and special. And we do have a lot of research opportunities. We have a giant research enterprise at the School of Medicine, and a good sized research enterprise on our main campus too. We have a really terrific advising program, I think. And we also have a lot of very structured pre-application or application preparation support. So we actually have courses that are designed to get you into the hospital. So there's a course called Med Prep 1, where an emergency room physician gives, you know, a semester-long series of presentations on what it's really like to be a doctor, what medical school is really like, you know, just all kinds of aspects of the profession. And once students have completed that course, which also includes like getting them a, you know, HIPAA certification and some other, you know, some other sort of logistical pieces that they need to be in the hospital. There is also an emergency room shadowing program. So you can take a course where you shadow in the emergency room a couple hours a week. And that's amazingly popular. Students love that. We also have and that's in our adult emergency room at our teaching hospital. That's just across Forest Park. So just really 2 train stops away. We also have a program in our children's teaching hospital, our children's hospital, that's part of our teaching hospital complex. And that is an opportunity for students to join a clinical research team in the emergency department. So the students who participate in that are going to be, sort of looking at the board for, who's been triaged, what kind of complaints they're presenting with, and then deciding, could any of them, be screened for eligibility for any of the ongoing clinical research studies in the emergency department. And they will actually approach the patients and their families and, begin the enrollment process, explain the study, make sure they're getting an informed consent. It's really, I'm still not jaded after as long as I've been here, and we've been doing this program a long time, that undergraduates have the opportunity to contribute to the creation of new knowledge in medicine. I find that astounding still. We also have some research courses in the department. Some students are doing translational research in a lab that also has a lot of clinical research going on as well. And so they might sign up for a biology research number called Bio 500, but they may also be, doing patient-facing work or at least shadowing their PIs in clinic and whatnot. We also have a Bio 265 course that is intended to be set up for students who are working really with clinical faculty on very clinical research opportunities, and more of an independent study, type of situation with that faculty investigator. I also went through a recent year and counted how many students listed research on their application, and 84% of the people in that year that were admitted to medical school did research at Washington University. I love that number because it's very clear if, that many people are doing it, it's not particularly competitive. It's not hard to get involved with. Most everybody who wants to do that, maybe you have to be a little bit persistent. It can be just like looking for a summer job. You might not get the first one you apply for, but if you keep at it, you will definitely come up with something. And the same thing is true here for joining a lab. So I think everyone who wants to do research gets into a research group and is able to have that experience. But it also means 16% were just not interested in that. And you know what? That is fine. Research is not required for medical school. And especially if you have aspirations that are more around primary care or community medicine and community health, and you want to invest your time into various kinds of service projects and community engagement. I have students who, we have a medical Spanish course here, and they translate over at the Casa de Salud, which is a free clinic for low income and underinsured and uninsured patients whose primary language is not English. And they've got translators there, both in Spanish and Arabic. So, there are lots and lots of terrific opportunities that are more clinically oriented for people that are less drawn to research, and you can absolutely still go to medical school. So it's very much about not a checklist, but about doing the things that you're really drawn to and that, that speak to you and spark your curiosity. We do have really great advising here, if I do say so myself. We really have a terrific team. And they're all very, very committed to the students they work with. And partly we have great outcomes because we have great students, but partly we have great outcomes because we also structure things so that our great students are really prepared when they applied and have gotten a lot of great coaching and great feedback on their application materials. So last year, 85% of our first-time applicants were admitted to medical school. The other 15% are going to reapply, and they will also get in. But 85% first time is a pretty terrific accomplishment. And we don't have final outcomes this year. People are still coming off wait lists, so I don't know what the count will be this year yet, but I expect something very similar. We also have specialty advisors who are very well informed for dentistry, for MD, PhD, nursing, pharmacy, physical therapy, lots and lots of other kinds of health professions. The number of students pursuing each of those areas is far fewer than medicine, but we're no less committed to it just because it's a smaller group of students we're working with. And, we keep developing more and more robust resources for all of those professional paths. As especially for medicine and dentistry, who are sort of required by their processes to participate in our advising. But also we invite other, other professions that are not going to expect the product of our process necessarily in their application, to engage in almost a year-long process, anyway, a 6-month-long process of really careful and thorough self-reflection. We've got a series of self-paced Canvas courses to get people started on that. We have regular advising appointments that we strongly encourage students to schedule in order to track their progress and, kind of unpack how things are coming together for them and strategize about what to do next. The Writing Center conducts personal statement workshops and also gives students individual feedback on their personal statements for their common application, but also on their, supplemental applications, which we call secondaries for medical school. But, just like the college process, some schools just have just take the Common App, but a lot of them have some additional questions that they'd like students to answer, and our Writing Center will help with that. We have a strategy meeting kind of after many of these materials are developed, where the advisor and the students sit down and really talk about how all the pieces of the application are fitting together and make sure that, everything that is being pulled together is synergistic without being repetitive. And then the Career Center also does mock interviews and mock interview practice for all the styles of interviewing that that health professions programs utilize. All right, that is kind of an overview. I am very happy to take questions. And I also, you can see my email is published right there. If you have really specific questions about your, circumstances, your, how your coursework in high school is going to translate or something like that, I would welcome you to either email me, or I think Morgan is going to put, someplace where you can see it, the Zoom link for my drop-in advising, which is every Thursday afternoon. So you are also welcome to come there with your questions, although that is first come, first served, and it's a Zoom meeting. So, sometimes you will have to sit in the waiting room for a bit, depending on how busy it is. So I would be happy to take questions. Okay, so let's see. I see one here. Well, I don't know if I already answered this in the presentation, but we do have specialty advisors for, lots and lots of different health professions that are not as, pre-vet in particular. We've got a terrific advisor who actually is is an instructor in our One Health ampersand program. So, you get really great expertise. And somebody wants to know, how easy is it to jump into pre-med if you haven't already indicated that earlier? I have students who decide on medicine, when they're juniors, and that's fine. And we'd love to work with them. And, they may or may not get all the coursework in if they haven't started any of it before graduation, but we will still work with them when they get ready to apply, even if they have to finish up a few courses in some kind of a, a post-bac program or something. And then there is a question about, can you talk a bit about how the ampersand programs link with a student wanting to pursue pre-health? So there are a couple of ampersand programs that are obviously like very, have a very pre-health flavor to them. There's one, medicine and society. There's a mind, brain, and behavior one. There's a couple of biology research ones. So there are, and a new People Planet Health ampersand, which is a kind of a One Health program. So there are definitely ampersand programs that are going to automatically appeal to at least some part of our pre-health audience. That said, my own kid my youngest graduated in 23. And so she was a first year student, maybe 5 years ago now, but she did the Holocaust series ampersand program. She did not end up majoring in history. She did not end up doing anything, that was actually related to that, but she got such terrific faculty mentoring. The faculty that teach in that program are tenured faculty who are just terrific. She had an amazing experience. Some of her best friends from college that she is still in touch with and will go to their weddings, she met in that program. So I don't think you should be afraid of doing the Irish literature ampersand program, even if you're pre-health, if you're really interested in Irish literature. There are lots of other ways to have pre-health experiences. You don't have to get that through your ampersand program at all. Let's see. How many people start pre-health and then drop out? I think that is a very difficult thing to count. And we don't really have a good way to count it because what does starting it mean? Does it mean taking one course? Does it mean marking that you had that interest on your application to college, which I'm not even sure we're collecting that information at this point. I think when I talk with students, some of them are like, I know I want to be a doctor. I have already worked as an EMT. I mean, some places you work as an EMT at 16, which is a little crazy to me, but that is a real thing in some parts of the country. So, some of them already have a lot of information about delivering healthcare and a lot of experience and are very sure. Others will say to me, I think I'm probably going to either go to med school or law school. And I think, well, that means you are completely undecided because those two things could not be more different. So, I think because it's hard to tell like how sure they even are about it, it's hard to tell how many end up walking away. What I will say is that we try very, very hard to message that no one should feel pushed out. If people leave pre-health, it should be because they are reaching for something that they feel more drawn to, not because they feel, we just don't have a weed out experience here. If you have some low early grades and you come and talk to a pre-health advisor about it, they're going to say, you can still be a doctor, or you can still be a dentist, or you can still be a physical therapist. Let's strategize about how to, balance your schedule better. Let's strategize about how to get you more academic mentoring so that you can hone your skills faster. We're going to help people be successful. And so I would like to believe that most students who don't end up pursuing medicine, it's really because they found something else that they like better. And then it says, what is the first year breakdown in terms direct from undergrad versus 1 versus 2 versus 3? I don't have those numbers top of mind. I know 80% of my students take at least one gap year, and one gap year is the most common. 2 is becoming more common. I will say that. I mean, I have more and more students. For one thing, I think you can get a better job if you can commit 2 years. So a lot of my students who want to work in clinical research during their gap time end up finding that they have much better offers if they're willing to make a 2-year commitment to the research group they want to join full time. So, it varies individually. I think, it's also a function of like, what are your real interests and, what what are you trying to accomplish when you're actually approaching that time? And then it says, when does the process of application start? We encourage students to start getting serious about preparing for application when kind of once they are settled into their fall semester. So hopefully before fall break, they will start like, meeting with their pre-health advisor, mapping out a plan for the year for how to apply. What are all the tasks that they need to do? How do they envision achieving all of those? Can you talk a bit more about opportunities for students who want to major in public health with a goal of getting an MPH rather than an MD? Absolutely. So we're going to have an undergraduate major in public health, essentially. It's called Public Health and Society. And if students want to go on to an MPH, whether they are starting in that major or another one altogether, we have a 3-2 program with our MPH program here. So they can stay here and do the first year of their graduate school at the undergraduate tuition rate. So that's pretty attractive to some people. And I do have a number of students every year that do go on to do an MPH without necessarily ever intending to deliver, to be a practitioner who delivers any, healthcare to individual people. They're just interested in population health. And it says, does taking Med Prep 1 guarantee clinical hours? Well, there are seat limits in the Med Prep 2 course. So it is, like any other course, it's registration priority. So some students may not, depending on how many other students are enrolling that semester. It's offered every semester, but depending on how many other students are enrolling that semester, some students may not get into it until they're a senior. Can you help us understand course selection if you are pre-med but not a biology major? We've got a great graphic on our website that is pre-med paths. And all of the four-year advisors also know how to refer students to that. So there's no one right or best sequence for the courses. It just kind of depends on what your interests are. And I think, if a student and their four-year advisor don't feel completely confident that the schedule that they are excited about is also setting them up well for their future goals. That's why we have drop-in advising with all the pre-health advisors. We've got pre-health drop-in advising every day of the week. And so you can definitely, find some time that you're not in class when you can come and talk to an experienced pre-health advisor about schedule questions. Let's see. It says the gap year seems to be a new phenomenon. Is this related to COVID backlog? Will this trend continue? I do think that a gap year was becoming more common. About half my students took a gap year before the pandemic. It has definitely ratcheted up post-pandemic. I don't see that trend reversing. So I think that will continue. And then how would you describe the pre-med culture at WashU? Competitive, collaborative, or a mix of both? So I think that we do have we intentionally have designed a very academically collaborative structure for all the basic science courses that students are in early on as pre-meds. That said, I think, social media is real. Students are on their phones, comparing themselves to other people, and that sometimes does not lead them in healthy directions. I try to discourage that. I ask them to, compete with themselves, and not worry about what their suite mate is doing, because it's not a race and you're not really competing against your suite mate anyway. Your suite mate might not even apply to the same schools you do. But I could definitely use more support, at home with messaging that. And I think I am getting, decent support messaging that, from our partners in residential life. But it's a tough thing to fight. Social media is pervasive. So that's my honest answer. What kind of MCAT prep does WashU offer? And if so, which year do they start? Our Learning Center does offer a very low cost MCAT prep option. And they typically do that in the semester before they're going to take the MCAT. If they wanted to do that before that, they might, that might be fine, but most students don't. Let's see. We've heard people are weeded out early, which is why the acceptance rate to med school is so high. Is that true? I really don't think that's true. I don't, some of my students change their minds. Like I can really, I already mentioned it's hard to figure out how to count. I can really only speak to the detailed stories, the observational data I have from students that I've worked with closely. Not every one of my four-year advisees and almost all the four-year advisees that I get assigned are pre-med on the way in their door. Not all of them end up applying to med school, but some of them it's because they discover that they love research and they really just they actually, they get in the clinic and they don't actually love it. They learn more about what you really have to do as a doctor and what med school is really like, and they're not that excited about it. And they love what they're doing at the bench in their lab. So they go to a PhD program. If you go to a PhD program in biochemistry at Stanford, that is a real outcome for a couple of students that decided they were not pre-med that I can think of recently. That is not a bad outcome. That is not any kind of failure. So I don't think people are being weeded out. I think some students find other things that they are more interested in. But we are supporting like 300 applications a year to medical school. So there's also not so many people walking away. Like it's 85% of like 300 people. So I think that's just simply not true. How many applications do you support? 300-ish a year, 300 or more. How many of those go direct to med school after undergraduate? So people not taking a gap year is only 20% of my population. So I don't know, what's 20% of 360? How early in my college experience can we enroll in some of the courses you highlighted, like Bio 500? So there's a research for credit course that any student can take. We have a different number for first years and sophomores. It's Bio 200, but it's basically the same course. It's just for lower division students. And I don't necessarily push joining a research group for first year students unless they already have pretty extensive research experience in high school, because I think it can be hard while you're making all the other adjustments you need to also commit to a lab and be able to follow through on everything. And I think you don't want to make a commitment to a lab and then have to pull back. So I encourage students to really kind of get their feet on the ground academically before they start looking for a lab. But I definitely have students who start research as early, who don't have extensive experience from high school, who start research as early as the summer after their first year. Some families don't want their kids to stay here and do that. They want them to come home. But if your family's fine with that, there are lots of summer research opportunities for rising sophomores, actually. Let's see. How rigid are the pre-medicine requirement classes? Do students going pre-medicine typically have enough time to complete a double major? Yes. Double majors in my students who are applying to medical school are very, very common. So, it must not be that hard to do if a lot of people are doing it. So I think it's, not everybody has a double major, but it's not unusual at all. If I want to pursue medicine, but major in something other than the sciences, like you mentioned, is there an outline schedule of classes I need to take? And yes, there's not a schedule. There are multiple possible schedules, and you and your four-year advisor will talk about that. And you can, come get reassurance from a pre-health advisor if you feel like you need that. And there is no single class that's recommended to take for a first-year pre-med student, except college writing, which is recommended for all students, pre-med or not. So it really depends on what your interests are. And again, work with your four-year advisor, double check with the pre-health advisor if you want confirmation. What are the seat limits in med prep? I do not have that top of hand. I would have to look that up. What is the average class size for upper level classes roughly? That kind of depends on the class. Something like biochemistry, that is an absolute requirement for the MCAT, might be still on the larger side, maybe, I don't know, 75 something like that. But other classes that are true electives might be much smaller, 25 or, in that range. Upper division laboratories are certainly going to be, 25 or less. Let's see. Is it pretty manageable to obtain direct patient care hours as a pre-health student? And does WashU have opportunities for students to earn patient care hours, hospital work experience? So there are a fair number of volunteering programs at local hospitals. And my younger students certainly pursue those, and I love that. I will say that more and more, in order to feel like they really have the right mix of experiences and in-depth enough experiences, that more and more of my students are getting at least part-time jobs in a clinical setting. Maybe, summer after their junior year, they might stay here in St. Louis, work full-time as a patient care tech or a transporter or something at one of the local hospitals, and then work part-time or PRN during the school year in their senior year. I am seeing more of that. Do faculty write recs for all students or the strongest? I mean, I do coach my students that they need to take some agency in getting to know faculty. If they never go to an office hour, if they, don't make an effort to be known by faculty, it will be harder for faculty to write letters for them. That said, I think students who make the effort do not have trouble getting letters of recommendation. How realistic is it to study abroad as a pre-med? Absolutely. Study abroad has always meant a gap year because the most common time to study abroad here is spring of your junior year, which is when you would also have to actually apply to medical school if you're going to go straight through. So that doesn't make any sense to go abroad, and lock yourself in a closet, writing application materials and taking an MCAT. That's just doesn't add up, right? So I've always strongly encouraged students who are going to go abroad to take a gap year, but many of my pre-med students study abroad. And we have some really terrific kind of pre-med oriented study abroad programs. So it's a very popular experience. What sort of medical experience? So we're not placing students in medical experiences, but both the pre-health advisors and the career centers provide great coaching for helping students search for the experiences that are going to be right for them. How might it be different finding research opportunities as somebody who already has college research experience? Yeah, if you've, I do have students who've already, they've done some kind of almost a cooperative education program at high school, or they've already had a gap year between high school and college, and they, spent that gap year in a lab. Like, if you really already know how labs work and you really understand, what you're getting yourself into, you can absolutely, first couple of weeks on campus, start looking for a placement. That is absolutely acceptable. And students with, really strong experience like that usually will come up with a research group that is eager to include them. What year do students usually start studying for the MCAT? I would say most popular times to take the MCAT are during junior year or summer after the junior year. And that a little bit depends on whether students are feel like they will do better on the MCAT if they can sort of exclusively focus on that, or whether they actually feel like, when I'm at school and in school mode, I'm going to do a better job of preparing for the MCAT. And I hear both things. That seems like a very personal kind of choice. Students typically study for a couple of months or a semester before they take it, but some people start earlier and study longer. And that is also very personal. That depends on your learning style, your previous experience with standardized testing, and definitely that's something you can process with your pre-health advisor, but ultimately the student is going to know themselves and what they need best. Are recs provided by the committee or an individual faculty? So individual faculty write letters for our students, and then the institution also provides a letter of introduction and advocacy. We call that the cover letter informally here. And so when students apply to medical school, they apply with a packet of letters, our letter of introduction and advocacy, followed by their individual faculty letters. Does WashU have resources or courses for EMT training? So there is a course on campus, but it is restricted to students who have gone through a selection process for our on-campus volunteer emergency support team, which is volunteer first responders for campus medical emergencies. The local community college does offer a summer EMT course, and so some of my students stay here and do that while they're also working in a lab part-time or whatnot, and or they might do an EMT course at home. Let's see, do international students have different things that they need to do for med school? So quite honestly, international students do face stiffer competition in the medical school admissions process. Not all US medical schools will accept international students. Many state schools require you to be, mostly will only take students who are residents of that state, but definitely even if they're going to take somebody out of state, they have to be a US citizen or permanent resident. So students who are here, on a student visa, have a more limited list of schools to which they can apply, mostly private schools. And in truth, the most selective schools are often the most welcoming to international applicants. So I do think international students are well served by having, the kind of profile that is going to be very attractive to a research intensive medical school like WashU or, its peer schools. So 3.8-ish science GPA, 520-ish MCAT, a depth of research, service, and clinical. Let's see. What are the most popular med schools with WashU students? So we send more students to our own School of Medicine than any other single institution. We generally have between 10 and 20% of every class at WashU School of Medicine. So over, in any 5-year period, we have more students going to WashU than any other single place. That said, we send students all over. We have a lot of students who end up in the Chicago area, both University of Chicago and Northwestern, but also Rush and Loyola are very popular with our students. And whether they, decide that they're more interested in Northwestern or Rush will somewhat probably hinge on how focused they were on like community service and population health versus, basic science or clinical research. Rush is not a research heavy school, for example. They are very community service focused. I wouldn't say that Northwestern isn't community service focused, but they certainly have are much more invested in their research profile than Rush is. So, there really are different fits depending on what students' interests are by the time they're applying. Do you know what's the percentage of international students at WashU Med School? I do not, but I would say it's a handful. It's not a high percentage. It's definitely less than 10% of the class. How many students apply to an MD versus DO program? So all of the numbers I was giving were for MD only. That's coming off of my a report that I get from the medical school Common App called the AMCAS application. I get results reports from them. And so all the stats that I share in these kind of sessions are directly from that. Some of that 15% that didn't get in also applied to DO schools and did get into a DO school. So absolutely, if students are very interested in primary care, like the DO philosophy, or are concerned that they, have a little bit softer metrics on their application and are really hoping to lean into, the holistic review promise, I think the DO schools are even better at that. And so some students will choose to apply to both. All right. That was a lot of really great questions. And it looks like we've worked our way through most of them. Morgan, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yes, I was just typing last answer to a last question. So thank you, Carol, so much for that presentation. Like you said, we had some amazing questions come through. So thank you all for submitting those and allowing Carolyn to share some additional information. I see as I'm saying this, there's a couple more questions coming in. I'm going to share now Carolyn's email address to which you can send any additional questions, specific or general. I'm also going to reshare the link to our general pre-health advising website. There you can find both the Zoom link to meet with Carolyn as well as her hours and availability. She's very kindly offering her time and resources to answer any questions that you all have, especially in the next week or so. But I'll just reiterate what she shared earlier is that Zoom is a first come, first serve. So if time is of the essence, an email might be a best format to send that in. Additionally, if you have any other questions, whether it's admissions related, financial aid, WashU experience, know you can reach out to any of the people who are listed on your WashU pathway, including your admissions officer, financial aid advisor, as well as our admissions service coordinators. We're all happy to help answer any of your last questions. And as a reminder, I know I started the webinar with this information, but for folks who may have joined a little bit later, this webinar is going to be recorded and added to your WashU pathway for you to reference afterwards. It may take about 24 hours, so just give it a minute, but that should come through for you to re-reference if there's a piece of information or question that you had that Carolyn already covered today during this session. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. And again, congratulations for your admittance to WashU. We are so excited to hopefully welcome you to the community. Please let us know if there's any additional support or questions that you have. And with that, we will wrap up for the evening. So thank you all for attending and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.